Hello, Harbor kids. It's Mr. Dave, and I'm going to read God to the Rescue. Joseph and his brothers grew up old and died, but their children's children stayed in Egypt, where they became a very large family. Later on, a new king began to rule, but this Pharaoh didn't remember Joseph, and he didn't like God's people. He made them into slaves and beat them and made them work harder and harder. God's people cried out to rescue them, and God heard them. He remembered his promise to Abraham. He would look after his people, and he would find a way to set them free. One day, Moses, looking after sheep, when something caught his eye. A bush was behaving very oddly. It was flickering with flames, but its leaves weren't burning. He took a closer look. "Moses!" boomed a big voice. Moses leapt back. The bush was talking to him. "I have heard my people's cries," God said. "I have seen their tears, and I have come down to rescue them. Go to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go free." Moses was afraid, but God said, "I will be with you." So Moses went to Pharaoh. "Pharaoh," Moses began. "God says." "God?" says Pharaoh. "Never heard of him." Moses kept going. "God says, let his people go free." "Why should I?" said Pharaoh. "Don't want to. Won't." So he didn't. So God gave Pharaoh 10 warnings called plagues. First, God turned the Nile River into blood. No one could drink the water. But still, Pharaoh would not let them go. So God made frogs come hopping and leaping and jumping. In your bed frogs, in your hair frogs, in your soup frogs, and all everywhere frogs. "Make them go away," Pharaoh screamed. "Make them go." So God took the frogs away. But Pharaoh changed his mind. "You can't go," he said. Then God sent zillions of gnats. But still, Pharaoh said no. So then God sent swarms of flies. Flies buzzing in your eye flies. And after that, sickness and horrible boils and huge hailstones and a storm of locusts. Then darkness when it should have been day, until it seemed the whole world, creation, everything was coming undone, falling back into darkness and emptiness and nothingness. Each time Pharaoh said, "Make it stop, and then I'll let them go." And each time when God made it stop, Pharaoh would change his mind and said, "Actually, no, you can't go." Finally, Moses warned Pharaoh, "Obey God, or he will have to send the worst of all things." Pharaoh just laughed. So God said, "The oldest boy in each family of Egypt must die, but my people will be safe." God told his people, "Take your best lamb to kill it and then put some of its blood over your front doors. When God passes over your house," Moses exclaimed, "God will see the blood and know that the lamb died instead of you." That night, it was just as God had said. Suddenly, piercing darkness, echoing down the corridors of all the palace, came a blood-curdling scream. Pharaoh's oldest son had died. At last, Pharaoh did what God said. "Get out," Pharaoh shouted. "Just go." And so, that very night, Moses and God's people fled out of Egypt, out of their slavery. They were free at last. So God's people would always remember this great rescue and call it Passover. This is an even greater rescue, but an even greater rescue is coming. Many years later, God was doing it again. He was going to come down once more and rescue his people, but this time God was going to set them free forever and ever.